Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland.
It's a disaster that's about to happen, and on Tuesday night when I go through the lobbies, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, to vote against the deal, there is, this is not a joke. It's not something which it's just appeared, and people are in, I think, for a very rude awakening when Brexit does happen. And there is a bit of delusion, I think, in London. Again, with these kind of Norway plus, or as I called it, the Norway plus stroke TK Max version the other week in the debate, the first section of the Brexit debate. And the EEA are going to be quite clear they don't want the UK in the EEA, this huge country. And being in the EEA won't get around all the implications for getting out into the rest of the European Union. If you're going to Switzerland in a truck, you still need to queue, you still need to go in, you still need to get all your documentation signed off, so the bureaucracy will be automatic. It is just creating a situation which will be untenable for farmers, for the fishing industry, especially the inshore fishing industry. The big people in the kind of extraterritorial waters have been saying how it might be great for them, but for the inshore fishery industry, which is some of the bedrock of fishing in Scotland, it's going to be an absolute catastrophe.
Mm-hmm. And obviously another key thing will be transport and travel, Ellen, and they're talking about extra expenses and delays and not automatically getting admitted to another country. What's your thoughts on the possible implications?
Surprising to see that people would vote out of a system that works and makes exactly these things easier, and then get absolutely outraged about the fact that now there's charges and time attached. It really is one of the very glaring examples of there being complete and utter misunderstanding about what the EU has meant to the lives of people here and what has made it so easy. And obviously, yes, EU citizens in the UK are scared, and scared for good reasons, but there's a lot of British people that are living in Europe that have to deal with the same uncertainties, but in another place. All of it could have been removed.
Yeah, I would just follow in terms of EU nationals, and I think the other thing that I've, as you'll know, Corri, I've been on about it for quite some time, is the impact of Brexit on the Good Friday Agreement, and EU nationals who also happen to be Irish nationals. And there's some cases at the moment where it's quite clear where Minister of State Caroline Noakes has made it quite clear that other international treaties will, basically undermine fundamentally the Good Friday Agreement, where an Irish national who lives in Northern Ireland, comes from Northern Ireland, identifies as Irish, has Irish citizenship, if their partner comes from another EU country or non-EU, non-Britain, somewhere anywhere else in the world, they will be forced to take up British citizenship. And that fundamentally is a detriment to the idea of you can be British, Irish or both within in Northern Ireland. So that should be a real huge worry for everybody in terms of undermining the Good Friday Agreement, and the fact that the Conservative Party really want to sacrifice it to keep the DUP on board. It should be worrying and send alarm bells off everywhere.
Well, we'll just probably kick off with the biggest topic in the news this week is Brexit. Now, last week we saw 2 votes in Westminster Parliament. Tuesday we had Parliament voting down Theresa May's deal with quite a significant defeat, and that was followed on Wednesday by Jeremy Corbyn's vote of no confidence, which Theresa just survived. Again, we're left in uncharted territory here, but it looks like the DUP saved Theresa's skin. Douglas, would you say that would be?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that was really the background to all of this, and while the DUP were quite happy to vote with the majority of the Commons on Tuesday for the massive defeat that the government suffered, they were back in line by the following day to give them their vote of confidence. And I think what the SNP members certainly were saying, we were just making signs of this is all about the money for the DUP and what they can get out of this situation. So I don't think they're really looking at the long-term future of the country in terms of the country for the purpose of that comment is the UK. But we need to actually it's really difficult to call where this is going to go from here as well, and I think that's the real difficult thing, not just for MPs, but for the vast majority of members of the public. You know, I think they're just heartily disillusioned and sick of this government for a whole range of reasons, but their incompetence over Brexit has just been astounding. And the very fact that, as a Member of Parliament, you know, even when you were a Member of Parliament as well, you know, you were wondering what was going to happen in the next 24 hours. We're in a position now where we're wondering what's going to happen in the next 24 minutes because of the pace of change and sort of lack of clarity over the future of the government, where they want to take things, it's just not there. And you know, I don't know what Greig feels about it as well, but because you're not involved in on the day-to-day sort of grind of being in Westminster. So what does it look like from your point of view?
Yeah, it's a bit different being taking a slightly outsider view. It's interesting that had Theresa May brought the meaningful vote at the time she intended to, I think the estimates were she'd have only lost by about a dozen votes or so. Instead, by delaying it over Christmas, she ended up with the worst defeat for a government in at least a century. I'm not surprised that those who voted against the deal then turned around and supported the government, to be honest, because a lot of them, they're very unhappy with May's deal. They're the hardcore Brexiteers. They're not happy with the Brexit they may get. But the one thing that frightens them more than not getting the Brexit they want is not getting the Brexit they want and ending up losing power to Jeremy Corbyn. So I'm not surprised they then closed ranks around the government on that.
Yeah. I think as well, Douglas, you stood up on Thursday and you know, tried to say about having talks cross-party and let's get together and see if we can come up with a solution, which seems a bit ironic given that this is where we are and it's taken 2 years that she suddenly thinks within a couple of days that she's going to be able to find a solution. That's not a realistic position.
For me, it's just not about finding a solution, but it's about getting people, getting their confidence back to say, yeah, we can actually trust what you're going to do. You know, we've had the last couple of years where negotiations have been taking place. It's been very difficult for any of the other parties to actually become involved in that process. We've been told from time to time through ministerial statements, from the Prime Minister coming back from the various summits, you know, this is what's been happening. We've not actually been involved as members of Parliament in that process, and you know, it's been a very much a Tory government trying to appease the small group within their own party to try and get a deal that they can agree to, and we now find that, you know, within the Tory party they can't even agree any deal that May's putting on the table. So, you know, I think from that point of view, you know, we just wonder where this is going to go, and to come in at the 11th hour and say, yeah, let's all come in and put our ideas on the table. I'm not sure, and I don't think Theresa May is actually capable of listening to the views of other people that would actually sway her opinions. You know, we had David Mundell come out last week as well, minutes after May had said, you know, let's all work on this together type approach, and then we had David Mundell coming out and say, well, we can't give up any of our red lines. The very fact of negotiation is you've got to have a bit come and go and negotiate with the other parties. Other parties will have red lines, but where can we, on some of these difficult issues, where can we actually meet in the middle? And I think that's been Theresa May's downfall, that she is just not, she doesn't have the skills or the personality to actually bring people together and allow them to come to a sensible conclusion. That we know that deal making, not everybody's going to be absolutely 100% happy, but if you can get as close to a win-win as you possibly can, then that's where we should be aiming for. And as I say, I don't think Theresa May and her group of acolytes that surround her, I don't think they've got the skills, the self-awareness and the talent actually to bring that off.
Obviously, one of the first topics we're going to be hitting, surprise, surprise, will be Brexit. big in the news again this week. And we saw that, you know, previously Theresa May's deal had been voted down by a historic majority in Westminster. And then she decided to include everybody in her talks. But bizarrely, Jeremy Corbyn refused to be involved in these talks unless no deal was taken off the table. Why did Theresa May survive the vote of no confidence after such a humiliating defeat, do you think, Mhairi?
I think, honestly, it's because of the failure on Jeremy Corbyn's part. That fundamentally, certainly from my perspective in Parliament, the problem is that both the Conservatives and Labour don't have a position on Brexit. You know, we got that for, what was that, about 2 years? Brexit means Brexit, but nobody could tell us what that is, and that's ultimately what the problem is just now. Now, Corbyn messing about with the vote of no confidence before Christmas, had he called that vote immediately after she had lost the vote, the meaningful vote, then I imagine that we would have had a greater chance, because by that point the ERG and the Tories hadn't had time to do deals with each other. They hadn't had time to dish out knighthoods, for instance, and peerages. So all he did was give the Tories an extra month, and that's because fundamentally I don't think Jeremy Corbyn wants an election, because it's going to force him into actually having to come clean with what his position is on things.
Do you think, Mhairi, that the Tories are still there because they will band together and stay in power at all costs?
Well, of course, anyone will band together and stay in power at all costs. That's the purpose of the UK government, and the margins for error are very slight in a first-past-the-post system, especially one which is not bringing clear majorities to the fore, as hasn't been the case recently. So that's what you'd expect. But what the problem is that the alternative, the only alternative which appears to be an offer from the opposition, is having another general election. So there's a general election campaign where people choose between two pro-Brexit parties without a properly articulated position, as Mhairi says. So what kind of general election campaign is that? Single issue general elections are bad enough at the worst of time, at the best of times, but this is not. This is the worst of times, and there's no articulate position to be had. So it's not surprising that that's happened. It's not surprising that, she survived that, but it's not surprising either that I understand Vince Cable has more or less said, Corbyn's not going to get his vote next time, because Corbyn's original plan was to keep having votes of no confidence so that he could avoid doing anything else, which I'm afraid seems to be really what he's been doing for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It's a dereliction of duty, really.
It's completely.
I mean, that's what's frustrating from our perspective, is because we're sitting there knowing that we have been arguing a reasonable position. We're not being radical with this. We're just saying, look, extend Article 50, which will give us more time to try and figure out something out for you to see sense. But we're limited in Westminster because Westminster comes down to a numbers game, and ultimately we can always be outvoted. So we're kind of, almost having to watch a car crash happening but not being able to do anything about it because Corbyn won't do anything.
No, I mean, that said, Yvette Cooper's amendment, which is the one which stands most likely chance of getting through, I mean, you will know the parliamentary debate now, that's what it looks like this week, does actually commit to extend Article 50. The interesting thing is that I suspect that it will have to cut across Tory tribalism, obviously, to get through, because the DUP aren't going to back it, I would have thought. So that will still make it very difficult for it to get through. And it's difficult to see another. There are a huge list of amendments, of which, of course, Ian Blackford's is only one. It's difficult to see any of those amendments, myself, changing and carrying through the parliamentary arithmetic to the extent that actually this debate is resolved in the next 10 days. I mean, I'd be delighted if it was the case, Mhairi, but that's not, from a spectator's point of view, it doesn't look as if it is the case.
Yeah, definitely not.
And obviously we're in uncharted territory, but do you feel that the Westminster processes and that whole arcane way it's run, do you think they're struggling? Do you think Westminster's struggling with how this is happening?
What's fascinating just now, if you ignore for a minute how horrific everything is, what's fascinating is, I've always said that I think that Westminster is not a functioning parliament. It is a club that masquerades as a parliament because its procedures are designed to make it difficult to challenge anything. But this is how big this crisis is, because for the first time ever, a light has been shone on that, and we're at this kind of deadlock almost. And it's just when I was listening to Murray describing, the last couple of months there, it's the first time as well that the theatrics of Parliament aren't enough. because all Westminster politics is just theatrics all the time till the next election, realistically. And what Corbyn's trying to do with this, you know, continual votes of no confidence, that's the kind of theatrics that 2 years ago might have worked, but because we're actually in a crisis, no, that's not sufficing anymore. And with Yvette Cooper's amendment, I mean, even this morning I was watching Mhairi, and it's almost like they're talking as though she's came in at the last minute with some brilliant idea. We have been arguing for this for months. You know, at months I've been in the room as we make the suggestion to both the Labour Party and to the Conservatives, and yet, you know, it's only now that it's being listened to. So again, it's depressing and frustrating watching all this happen and knowing that you're kind of fighting it with one arm tied behind your back.
First thing we're going to turn to about this week's news would be Brexit. What else would we start talking about? And I've no doubt you'll have seen that there was a fiasco this week in terms of the string of amendments and all the voting that was going on. But essentially, we're no further forward. Theresa May was sent back to Brussels, but I think within 5 or 6 minutes, Brussels were saying, I don't know why you're bothering, because we're not renegotiating. This whole thing is just an absolute shambles, isn't it?
It's a disaster. I mean, I think we were on this programme about a year ago and said exactly the same thing. But the fact is that the mainstream media today are actually bolstering up the facade of some kind of reasonably intelligent negotiations by Number 10. And people are beginning to get desensitised that this is just the way it is, and it isn't. It's one of the worst negotiated agreements, I think, in the history of any agreement going, and it beggars belief that they're actually getting away with the stuff they're getting away with. Now we're talking about D-Day analogies as if somehow this is supposed to be acceptable and firing up the enthusiasm of good old England. It's an embarrassment. It really is an absolute embarrassment, and the sooner we get away from this damn union, the better, because frankly, there is no explanation for it, really. Seriously, no.
In terms of Greig, I mean, obviously the clock's ticking. Do you think, are we heading for a no deal?
Nobody knows. Not a single person on the planet knows. Theresa May doesn't know. Michel Barnier doesn't know. So we'll have to just be prepared for whatever might happen. I would have thought the chances of a no-deal Brexit might have increased over the last couple of weeks with the developments, or the non-developments of the last couple of weeks. But I don't believe that there will ever be an utter, complete, off-the-cliff edge, no deal, nothing agreed on anything type Brexit. For the simple reason that there will be a few things put in there because it's in everybody's interest. Those who trade with us from Europe and vice versa will want to have something at some stage in there to try and not cause, well, put it this way, France and Germany don't want to see disruption to their countries, and some things that they'll put in place to protect themselves will have a knock-on beneficial effect on the UK. So there'll be something in there. I think it's dangerous to talk about, you know, an utter no deal, because what we're doing there is playing into the hands of those that will turn around and say, oh, look, we're going to be allowed to increase the amount of trade by 1% over the next 5 centuries, or something like that. They'll try and portray it as good when it's utterly bad. There is nothing good in Brexit.
And obviously it was announced that the February recess was to be cancelled and the MPs were to go back, although apparently a third of the MPs won't be, they're just staying at home. Yeah. So do you think that was just a bit of a PR exercise, kidding on that they've got their finger on the pulse, but really we don't?
We gather that there was no Brexit business to be talked, so effectively all they're doing is just cancelling one out by the other, but effectively she can't keep up this kind of internal barrage that's not being promoted in the media. She knows she's in deep trouble, and she knows this is really a Conservative situation. I mean, the analogy somebody mentioned to me the other day there was in World War I. It was an internal family feud that caused absolute Armageddon. And this is something similar, but it's purely Tory organised. And we're being told to accept it. You have to accept this because the media is holding back all this negativity and the reality that we can see by looking at other European newspapers and Irish newspapers in particular. This is seriously bad. And the first thing that will be worse is come the 29th, it's not so much problems with getting material in, it's going to be the panic buying. It's going to be the absolute fear factor that people have of families of, can I feed my kids? Because one day of snow and all of a sudden we're getting panic buying down south. because they don't know how this is going to last. So God knows what it's going to be like the 29th of March.
You picked up there on the Irish point, and it was a bit disturbing this week to see Dominic Raab at his at committee admitting that he hasn't even read the Good Friday Agreement. Now, apparently it's not even that big a document, but, you know, would anybody else in their workplace get away with such dereliction of duty?
No.
It's 40 pages. It's not difficult.
Yeah.
You go into any negotiation, you have to know every single conceivable option, avenue, and what you're trying to get. He's more or less just saying, don't query me. You know, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get, on the assumption that he thinks that the Europeans are somehow going to sit back and think, you are the higher power, we will give it and give you what you want. He's been told. And this is all chutzpah for the TV, for the media, and for the probably internal politics of the Conservative Party, but
obviously, if he's not read that document, then you wonder how much else he understands in terms of the context and the actual situation and what the potential impact is. It's almost as if he's glossed over the top of it.
Corri, sorry, David Davis had said that he had documentation being worked on specific market segments, and I saw him being interviewed by a committee in Westminster, and he just sat there chewing sweets saying, no, we haven't got anything, we haven't done anything. And nobody said, but you said you're working on this stuff, that these documents are already. So it's just lies. I mean, it's beyond argument. The fact is that the guys are shysters and charlatans, and we allow it to happen because there's no big brouhaha, because the media is just holding back this wall of deceit.
Hello and welcome to The Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. This week we're going to be talking about Brexit, surprise, surprise. We'll talk about Glasgow City Council settling the equal pay deal, Nicola Sturgeon going to North America, and we might even talk about question time. And joining me this week we have MSP James Dornan and Councillor or Bailey Annette Christie from Glasgow City Council. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, now I do hope you're going to behave yourself, James.
Right. He'll try.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about first is that favourite topic that I'm being sarcastic, Brexit. So, this week, any different to last week?
Groundhog Day all over again. It's, I believe Parliament's Westminster sitting next week for a very important vote that's going to be as important as the last vote was. And we're going to be absolutely no further forward, I suspect, at the end of it. Although there's some talk about the Labour Party trying to find a way to help Theresa May push it through.
Yeah.
It's nice to see the social
they're all
after the working
coming
class.
together.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
Did you just say they're better together, Annette?
Yes, they are. Those two, definitely.
They would be better together. Else.
Leave us to our own devices. Thank you.
I think, I don't know, are people talking to you about it? You obviously are in touch with people a lot, Annette. You're very active in your local community. Are people talking about it? Are they getting fed up? Or?
Well, those of political persuasion, they look to me and to the SNP for answers. And of course, we don't have the answers because they don't listen to us. Anyone else on a normal level, the people on the street, I'm out there answering the local questions. Usually it's potholes and dog fouling. That's the big issues of the moment for many people.
I understand you're very good at sorting out the potholes.
Yes, I am indeed.
You need to cut out the dog fouling.
I know, I must stop that. But yeah, they are worried because it's all scaremongering as well, because the vote for Brexit was based on a pack of lies. Now, nobody knows. They're in a mess down there. Nobody knows what they're doing, and we don't know what to expect. So it's all this, am I going to get my medicine that I need to have diabetes? Is that going to be available? Can I get oranges from Spain? All these sort of things, no one knows, so it's absolute confusion.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Westminster know no better than anyone else on the street.
And do you think, James, that, my feeling is that I obviously am a Remainer, a passionate Remainer, didn't realise how passionate I was about my European identity until the threat came. But do you think that most people would have said, well, okay, obviously Scotland didn't vote for it, but people that see things on a UK-wide basis, okay, fine, it's happening. If they had at least given us some clarity some time ago, I think that is a big problem for people.
I think it is, and I think that's why many people who voted Leave are now regretting their decision, because there's no clarity, and any clarity that has come out of it it's been crystal clear that we were told lies to get this vote through. That bus is a wee bit like the train in Harry Potter, you know, where it's just nobody else can see it, it just disappears, and the 350 million disappeared with it. It's been a complete farce from start to finish. There's been so much dishonesty from people who should know better, people in the public eye, politicians, what they like, who should know better, and there's almost like a small clique of mad right-wingers that are trying to drive Britain to extinction. I've never seen anything like it in politics in my life. It's the strangest. Well, in UK politics in my life, it's the strangest thing I've ever seen.
With me this week, I have Professor Kirstein Rummery, who is Professor of Social Policy at Stirling University and also the Scottish spokesperson of the Women's Equality Party. I also have Kurt Bassuener, who is a PhD candidate at the University of St Andrews and co-founder of the Democratisation Policy Council. Welcome both of you, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, what will we start with this week? Let me think. What's been going on this week? Brexit. Anything happening on Brexit?
Well, not enough happening on Brexit, it would appear, as the clock ticks down and it's getting all very, very, very close. I think it's really interesting the way the different political parties are responding to that pressure at the moment. There does seem to be a bit of a lack of leadership from the main opposition in terms of calling up its supporters to support the leadership, but without any clear vision for what their alternative Brexit strategy would be, or whether or not they would support a no deal, or all sorts of things going on. And it's all very, very concerning, because we do know the implications of a no deal Brexit are absolutely devastating in some quarters, and it's a little bit worrying the lack of political leadership that's going on.
I think, as you say, devastating. There was a report out this week, the State of the Economy report from the Scottish Government, and they were saying the economy is doing fairly well right now, but if there's a no-deal Brexit, it will be catastrophic. What are your thoughts on the whole thing?
I agree with Kirsten. I mean, one of my biggest, it doesn't shock me where the Tories are in this, with some notable exceptions like Anne Soubry and so forth. But what I find most frustrating is Jeremy Corbyn's continued straddle. I do find it uplifting that there are an increasing chorus of backbenchers and other notable members like Chuka Umunna and David Lammy who have come out and said, you know, we very much want to stop this going forward. But I think the meta level issue is that a number of parliamentarians on both sides of the equation recognize what a train wreck this is going to be, but the leaders of both the Tories and Labour have demonstrated a lack of leadership throughout the process.
And I think you can understand, if you look at it, if you take your sort of concern for the country hat off and pretend that you are just a political scientist and you've got no skin in this game, which none of us can be because it affects all of us, you can see the political game that Corbyn is playing. So he's got at least as many Leave constituencies that either vote Labour or could vote Labour as he does Remain constituencies. So he's never been able to come out and say, actually, I oppose Brexit, because he would lose the votes that he needs. And of course, Labour Party, like the Tory Party, like all political parties, their main aim in the short to medium term is to get into power. Yeah. So they're playing a game that they think will get them into power. They think is appeasing both the Remainers and the Leavers, but what it's doing is leaving a really frightening political vacuum. I mean, it's not just the economic impact of no-deal Brexit. If you look at all the stuff that's coming out about the impact on the NHS, medicines, the impact in my section, the higher education sector, the research funding that we're already losing, the fact that free movement of people, you know, Brexit has all been, we're going to end free movement of people. That means ending my movement into Europe, but it also means ending really good researchers' movement into the higher education sector, which is why the higher education sector is vastly opposed to this.
So you're saying that you're finding that that's happening already?
It is happening already. So I've got colleagues who, from the EU, who are uncertain about what's going to happen in the future and therefore not renewing their contracts, going back to their home countries. I've been turned down for research funding bids that are EU focused, not yet because the EU funding has gone, but because of the uncertainty
Right.
of what's going to happen in the future. Now, we punch above our weight in our sector. You know, in the UK, we are an English-speaking country, but we have access to 28 countries' worth of researchers and ideas. We take ourselves out of Brexit, we will absolutely lose that edge, and that's going to have not just a short-term impact on the economy, but a very long-term impact on the economy. And the most frightening thing is that all of the people who are pro-Brexit don't seem to have an alternative plan. They don't seem to know what it is they're voting against, what it is they really don't like about the EU. What has become really obvious over the past 2 years is they have no idea how the EU functions. They have no idea how to negotiate with the EU. And so we're absolutely at a sort of point in which the future is very, very uncertain, and markets don't like that. So our economy might be doing fine at the moment, but it's certainly going to have an impact. And of course, as a feminist, I know that the impact is going to be disproportionately on women and disproportionately on the poor as well.
It's interesting to have both of you here. Both of you are academics, and you're saying that it's already had an impact on you're trying to get funding, and some of your colleagues are leaving. Are you finding the same at the University of St Andrews?
Yeah, I mean, when I sort of survey my cohort that entered the PhD program, you know, a number of them, at least 5 of them, were EU member state nationals from outside Britain, and then you add to that 2 Scots. It's going to be harder to get PhD and students across the board. At St Andrews, that's a particularly large group, and it's going to make it harder to attract faculty, new researchers. It's already had the impact without it actually coming into force, and that's only going to snowball.
Yeah, and this week, of course, in Westminster, the SNP had tabled a motion to extend Article 50, which would have meant delaying the process. And it fell, and only 3 Scottish Labour MPs supported it. And that just seems petty, you know.
That's party politics. That's very much party politics, because Labour and the SNP, of course, are very historic enemies, particularly Scottish Labour and the SNP, because they very much feel like they're competing for the same sort of territory.
But you would expect that when Labour table a similar amendment, the SNP will support it?
Probably, because I think the SNP is also playing a little bit more of a long game.
I think that's right.
You know, they are thinking a little bit more strategically about how they position themselves, and they've always set themselves up as having the interest of Scotland. Of course, 62% of Scotland voted Remain. That does mean there is a substantial minority of people in Scotland that would support Brexit.
Yeah.
I doubt they'd support a no-deal Brexit, but you've got some very hard levers in the Scottish parties. But again, that is them being whipped, Labour being whipped to align to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership.
Yeah, you see that with deselection.
Exactly. So there's a big threat around deselection. There's a big threat, and we know the Labour Party is in itself split along myriad factions, but particularly along the pro-Corbyn, anti-Corbyn lines. And all this, I mean, and the Labour Party is fantastic as a party for doing internal politics before it thinks about anything else. And sometimes that works, but most of the time that doesn't work. And I would say that we are, without being too dramatic about it, we're in a time of national crisis. This is not the time to play party politics. This is time to think about what is in the best interest of the country. And if we have to do Brexit, and obviously I'm revealing myself as I would rather not do Brexit, but if we're going to do Brexit, a no-deal Brexit is absolutely catastrophic. And Corbyn and the Labour Party are leading us there just as much as the Tory Party are. And they're both, I mean, I agree with Kurt, there's a complete lack of leadership there and a complete lack of strategic vision. I don't think either side, apart from the SNP, who've got quite a clear vision for where they're taking Scotland, none of the other political parties have a clear vision at all. And they're not communicating that to the electorate, and they're certainly not communicating that to their parties.
I've got with me now Deputy Leader of the SNP, Keith Brown. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So we're here today in Aberdeen for a conference. How important are these local conferences in terms of getting campaigns up and running?
Really important. It's always important to allow people to have their say and to contribute towards a debate they feel very strongly about. And I think within the SNP we've done that with our national assemblies, but it's great to see the wider independence movement also giving people an opportunity to come together and also lay out their vision, debate their vision for an independent Scotland.
And how important is it to kind of to separate independence from party politics?
Well, it's got to be the case that more people that are involved in the political parties have to get involved in independence if we are to achieve independence. So that broad-based appeal, that inclusive nature of the debate and those being involved in it is extremely important.
And we're in Aberdeen today, so how important is it to kind of involve different areas of Scotland in this?
Well, it is very important because obviously there's just a question of logistics. People having to travel to different parts of Scotland can be quite difficult for some people. So to encourage as many people as possible to contribute, having local events like this in the North East, I think is very important.
And is it important to realise that across Scotland different things won't work for different communities? That something that might work here won't necessarily work elsewhere in Scotland?
That's true of campaigning, I think, for political parties, and it's also true of the wider campaigns like independence. You really have to have your campaign rooted in what's important to the local community. So, for example, in Aberdeen and the surrounding area, energy will be much more important than perhaps it might be in different parts of the country. Fishing, of course, has got a particular resonance in this part of the country. Rural issues also. So, yes, I think it's very important that we take into account the differences across Scotland.
And in terms of the wider political picture, we've heard today that there's not going to be any meaningful vote in the UK Parliament for at least another couple of weeks. How do you think Brexit will affect the case for independence?
Well, what we're finding just now, we're out campaigning quite regularly on independence, is that people are just completely scunnered with Brexit, and they're now seeing things like the Honda announcement, the Nissan announcement, or the Dutch government saying they've had 250 companies from the UK looking to relocate to Holland. These things are playing on people's minds. People are anxious. And thus far, we've managed through the work of the Scottish Government to keep employment high, unemployment low. But people are worried about this. They've seen the value of the pound devalue. They've heard about the stories about the lack of preparation from the UK Government. They've heard about possibly the need for stockpiling food and issues in terms of medicine. So people are very anxious. And given that, the solid, steady performance of the Scottish Government, plus the case for independence, I think, has given people the incentive to think very deeply about that.
And as it gets closer and closer to Brexit Day, do you think people are starting to kind of worry a bit more about what that might mean for them?
I think there's no question that that's the case, and it's not just the public, but sectoral interests like the CBI, the Chambers of Commerce came out very strongly. How are they expected to be able to plan for this when within 17 days of the actual Brexit day we won't have a position from the UK government? So many companies, for example, are having to spend tens of millions of pounds on preparations which may not be necessary, but that's what they have to do. So I think it's the case, again, seeing growing anger and impatience from people with the absolute dissolution, if you like, in Westminster between the two big parties and in particular the government, where it's all over the place. Government ministers taking out an article in the Daily Mail attacking their own government. I mean, this is farcical stuff, and people are crying out for much more steady and considered government, and they can get that here in Scotland.
And how important are events like this in kind of rebooting the campaign for independence?
I think the strength of the campaign last time in 2014 was its broad-based and grassroots nature, and it flourished. And with that, many of those arms of that movement have stayed in place, and it's very important they continually look at the issues which are important to them, work out as well how to broaden their appeal. We have to go beyond 45 to get over 50%, and the only way to do that is to re-examine the offer that you're making. So I think events like this, where people get the chance to sit down and talk these things through, in particular involving young people, I think they're extremely important.
And what do you think are the key lessons that could be learned from 2014 in terms of the potential of going forward to another campaign?
I think some of the things that we did right, it's very important that we stick with that. So making it inclusive, giving the right message to EU nationals, to young people. I think we have to provide more assurance to pensioners. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, why would you want to defend one of the worst pensions in the developed world, which is what we have here in the UK? But I think some of the scare stories last time about pensions, we have to be better at rebutting that and putting forward our own positive case for what a decent deal for pensioners might look at, like in an independent Scotland. So there's a number of issues where we have to provide more reassurance, but at the same time we must ensure that we keep that broad-based, inclusive campaign together.
It seems like it's very important to involve different kinds of communities.
That's right, so you really have to have a message for every part of Scotland, both geographically and in terms of sectoral interests. People will look for that kind of information to find out what it would mean for them. I think equally important is trying to enliven, if you like, engender the enthusiasm for what independence could mean for Scotland. Local decision making, proper decision making, you know, a steady government, for example, which we're not seeing in Westminster. And also not a wasteful government that's squandering money all over the place. For example, like the seaborne freight fiasco, £14 million to a company that had no ships. So I think it's very important that you talk to the different parts of Scotland, whether geographically or sectorally, and tell them what the offer is, the potential is for independence.
And what do you think should be done differently this time from the last campaign?
I think we have to work very hard. I mean, I think the thing last time was it built towards a crescendo. We saw more and more people getting involved. I think we've got to start from a bigger base this time. We start from a healthier base in terms of support for independence, nudging around 50%. But we have to get lots of people involved from the very start, whereas last time it sort of started narrow and became wider. I think we have to make sure that we do that and continue to get a message across. And we have to do it in a respectful way that recognises that some people who voted no last time had their reasons for doing that and try and address them. Not by saying you were wrong and this is why you were wrong, but by saying how do you think, what are the things you need to know about independence that can move you from your previous position to one of supporting independence.
And I think one of the main questions that people here are going to want answered is there any date in mind for any referendum?
Well, I think because of what we're seeing with Brexit, I think Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely right to say that we have to know what the deal on Brexit is before we can put before the people of Scotland the next steps towards independence. I think that's just common sense because there's so much uncertainty. It seems absurd that we're almost into March and we're still talking about the fact we don't know what the deal is, but we don't. Nicola Sturgeon has said that right from the very start, and I think that's absolutely right. People are, as you've already mentioned, preoccupied, anxious about Brexit. We have to let them see what the prospects is for Brexit and what the deal is likely to be before going on to talk about the next steps towards independence.
It's something that keeps being pushed back, so in turn that keeps pushing this back as well.
Well, that's right, but Nicola had said from the start that we must know what the deal is first. People in Scotland must know what the deal is first. It's probably not going to change anybody who's already committed to independence, whatever the outcome of Brexit, but there are other people who want to know what that's going to mean for them. And I'm surprised by the number of people that have come forward to me, we're out campaigning fairly regularly, both on independence and in terms of party politics, who are saying that they've just had enough of the Brexit nonsense and they're looking for the opportunity to move towards independence.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
One of the things that's very important is what happens on a Section 30 order. So now I have said, and I think Gillian may have been at the agreement when I've said it, I don't think that certainly the SNP and I don't think the Yes movement should be willing to anticipate a refusal of a Section 30 order as a reason not to call a referendum. If we want to have a referendum, then we decide we're going to have a referendum.
With us today we have Philippa Whitford MP and Sandra White MSP. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, we had an eventful week once again. I think we should start off by speaking about the International Women's Day and the unfortunate news that came to us on International Women's Day, which is that the baby of Shumaima Begum has passed away. The child was 3 weeks old. Would you like to kick us off on this discussion, Sandra?
I think it's very, very sad. And I also think it's not just sad, but it's reprehensible what's happened, not giving her citizenship, not being able to bring her out from the refugee camp. Our British citizens, the baby was born a British citizen, and perhaps that baby would have survived if they'd been brought out. And one of the issues I'd like somebody to look at, I'm sure we'll get figures, maybe Philippa may know, I don't know, but in a gendered balance, how many men have actually came out from these, not just refugee camps, but from prison, having been, ISIS. Just would be interesting to know, in International Women's Days, we're talking about how many men have actually been repatriated back to Britain compared to women. But I think it's something that is reprehensible, as I said, that this young girl, she was a girl, 15 years of age, thought perhaps, who knows what went through her mind, get married, etc., but to lose 3 children.
It seems...
And the last one being born, living for 3 weeks.
Yeah, an opportunity that the UK had. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
The Home Secretary decided that instead of giving a passport and making sure that these citizens can come back home, no passport was issued, and actually the citizenship was withdrawn, which is a whole new issue in itself and really needs to be discussed. I think in a constitutional way we're really facing a big moral dilemma when it comes to this.
I think it is particularly the moral aspect of this. I'm not saying that Shamima Begum should come home and have a free ride and all is forgiven and forgotten, but to abdicate responsibility and say that suddenly it's Bangladesh's responsibility for her when she's never lived there, she has never held citizenship. Now, she would have the right to apply for citizenship before turning 21, and I wonder, is that what the Home Secretary describes as the legal basis for this? Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I had thought you had to have another citizenship rather than have the right to apply, rather. And therefore she has been, at the moment, made stateless, and that is against international law. Now, about 400 fighters have apparently returned, depending on the crimes they're felt to have committed. Some obviously would face justice, and I have no difficulty with her coming back and facing prosecution if there's evidence against her. But others have gone through de-radicalisation programmes and mentoring, etc., to try and re-establish them. And, this business of removing citizenship has become more common. There appear to be over 100 cases in the last year, and probably the majority of them are men, so I don't know what the gender balance is, but we've heard of 2 more cases today that he's removed citizenship from 2 other girls who went as teenagers, who now have children as well, who would be British citizenship. And to me, this idea that you just wash your hands of these issues when these young people were born and grew up in the UK, were radicalised and groomed in the UK.
And to a degree failed by the UK.
Exactly, it's a UK issue.
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish and Broadcasting Scotland. I'm joined today by novelist, playwright and performer Alan Bissett and the fabulous Linda Fabiani MSP. And it's great to be back. I've been off the last couple of weeks with the dreaded Lurgy, so it's nice to be back in the seat, and welcome to you both.
Hello.
And we've also got a very young guest with us today. We've got 2.5 guests. We've got Ivor here too, so I'm sure he'll give us a bit of input during the show. So the first thing we're going to talk about, folks, obviously, is the awful news that came out of New Zealand this week, and we had 49 people shot dead and dozens more injured in 2 attacks in Christchurch mosques. Now, the gunman live streamed this attack, which is bad enough in itself, but more disturbingly, some of the news outlets have been using this footage as well, and you're thinking, well, what is it we've come to that this is the kind of level of news that people think you want? But sadly, across the globe, we're seeing more and more right-wing extremists. What do you think's causing this?
Well, I think it's been a slow build-up over years and years and years. I've now been elected for 20 years, for example, and one of the first sort of campaigns that I got involved in after I got elected was when there was asylum seeker dispersal up to the Dungavel, which at that time was in my patch. And I was just absolutely appalled at the system that was allowing dawn raids with families with children, that was putting innocent people in detention. And then the level of appeals, which meant that they shouldn't have even been lifted in the first place, And of course that resulted in the Glasgow Girls campaign and stuff. But so there's been a build-up of nasty, horrible rhetoric from both politicians and the media to some extent about people, excuse me, people who come to our country. And the frustration of not being allowed in Scotland to behave differently and do things differently because it's a reserved matter is awful. And I think that kind of thing has just carried on through. And then you had the rise of UKIP, and I have to say, helped along by, well, mainstream media. You just need to look at BBC Question Time and how often UKIP were on it, for example. There's a bit of me thinks maybe with society generally sleepwalked into it, but there's another bit of me thinks it was quite clearly directed by some. And I think it's built up, not just in Scotland, UK, but wider. And there's this whole sense of people coming and trying to take what's ours, and it's horrible. It's just nasty. So I think there's quite clearly a lot of folk to blame for the feelings that other people are getting. Nobody's to blame for somebody that would go and do what this guy in New Zealand did. Of course they're not. There's something very, very bad there. I don't think you can apportion blame to any other individual. But there's a whole feeling in society. Social media, of course, helps spread that. So I think that's another issue. And back to how you started this conversation, the idea that mainstream media were using some of these issues, I just find sick and awful. And that, oh my goodness, they should know better.
Yeah. Obviously, picking up what you said there, Linda, about how long this has been building up, and we saw things like the Joe Cox murder in 2016 and stuff. Alan, what do you think the media's role has been in creating this hostile environment?
Well, the media has basically created a situation whereby racism has become normalised. The drip, 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 constant, steady stories about immigrants, about Muslims, so that people see headlines when they go into the news agents, and it just starts to become the most normal thing in the world. They don't even question it. But I think there's various different strands to this. One is the media's role. The other is capitalism's, because when capitalism fails as colossally as it has since 2008 and the banking crash, which has now disappeared in the memory hole, the largest theft in history, whereby trillions of pounds of public funds were channelled towards the financial sector to save it from its own excesses. History shows us that whenever you put enough people into poverty, there's a great polarisation between left and right, and the right tells a story about immigrants and marginalised groups, an easy story about them being the ones to blame, and the left tells a story about how basically the structure of capitalism has failed us and we have to work together in order to try and bring the wealth back down towards the people. And unfortunately the right controls the media, so it's easier for them to transmit that story. So people are falling for the easy answers about immigration and about very vulnerable communities being responsible for the failure of society. That's what they're being told. But the other thing that really frustrates me is, especially in countries like the United States or Australia or New Zealand, when you get far-right white extremists talking about immigration, you feel like saying, hang on,
exactly.
How did you end up in this country?
Yeah, let's ask the Aborigines about that. Let's ask the Mhairis about that.
Your country was formed in genocide, and in the case of the United States, genocide and slavery, these two enormous racist historical crimes, that should be the starting point of the conversation. And often that's completely erased in this very simplistic narrative about vulnerable communities being a threat to our way of life. And you're like, well, that's an interesting way that you've phrased that there. Completely ahistorical analysis. So there's a lot to discuss when it comes to these kind of issues, and these are the starting points: capitalism and historical racism.
In terms of, obviously, linking to the EU referendum, we saw that horrific poster that was almost Nazi-like of the queues of people.
It was disgusting.
On the morning of Joe Cox's murder, that poster was released in the morning and it got forgotten about. And also, I believe that very morning as well, Britain First had issued a threat to Muslim politicians. This all happened in the same day, but obviously because of the murder itself, these things were obscured. And any other news day, these should have been looked at and looked at very, very closely, because they're all linked. These three aspects are linked. And as much as we hear about Muslim extremism and Islamic terrorism, more people are killed by white extremists than by Muslim fundamentalists. So that's not the public perception of things. And you have to ask, well, why is that not the public perception of things? Who is inflating one side and minimising the other?
I'm joined today by Chris Stevens MP and Ellen Höfer, and we're going to discuss the week's news. We're just going to give time Chris to get his breath back because he's run all the way from the station the wee soul, but he'll manage, no bother. So welcome to you both.
Hi. Welcome.
Okay. So of course first on the topic this week, guys, is Brexit. I'm sure everybody's absolutely fed up to the back teeth, but the problem is it's such an important issue that we need to talk about it. So this week, Theresa May has said that she might not bring the vote back if there's insufficient support for it to pass. And if it doesn't pass, then the EU have set the deadline of the 12th of April for the UK, unless they come up with like a new plan. Will there be a vote, Chris?
Well, I think you're probably better putting on 6 numbers this week and you'll get better odds as to trying to guess where we'll be by the end of the week. All I can tell you is I know we're in a 3-line whip Monday to Thursday, possibly and been told we're on standby Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Next weekend I'm not sure you'll have an MP guest next week because we might still be down the road. So, but I think there's a number of things which concern me. I think Theresa May's statement on Wednesday, placing the blame on MPs was rather disgusting. And you'll know, Corri, because you were like me, elected in 2015. We lost a parliamentary colleague, Joe Cox, who was killed. That to try and put the blame on the members of Parliament and to try and make them the public enemy, I think was very dangerous. And I think that there will be a lot of comment about that when we return tomorrow. Whether there'll be a vote or not, I think they'll probably try and have another go, but I think that what we also now have is the real possibility that Theresa May might not be Prime Minister by this time next weekend. It certainly looks as if the coups have begun, with one side wanting to put in David Lidington and the other side wanting to put in Michael Gove. So it's quite clear that there is now a very real crisis within the Conservative Party. And this was always going to be the case. This issue has been eating away at the Tory party for 20 years and have never resolved it. And we go back to the fundamental principle of no one explaining what leave would look like. There wasn't a booklet to say this is what the UK leaving the EU would look like. And I think that is primarily why they've got into all the difficulties they have and why we had fake red lines and why we had all these other issues which have been totally and utterly unresolved. And I think the lesson for us going forward for another referendum is we rightly had a booklet, 600-page book, which gave an outline of what the vision was. Now, obviously, I would want to see changes to that booklet, and I think we need to update it. But I think that demonstrates why the Scottish Government were correct to have a booklet and provide a vision for independence.
But I think the Speaker's probably put a bit of a spanner in our works, given that he said he'll not accept anything unless it's a material change.
Yes.
So do you think this is why she's kind of, again, backpedaling a bit?
They might argue that what they have agreed with the European Union is a material change. The government might argue that, and obviously there are deadlines. That also will place how amendments are constructed. There'll have to be some serious consideration to that as well, because I think the Speaker gave quite a fair ruling, which was you can't keep coming back with the same thing time after time, the same parliamentary session, and expecting different results. As we've seen, the first result was the biggest defeat in parliamentary history, and the second time was the 4th biggest defeat in parliamentary history. So, as I said at the start, you could put 6 numbers on, you'd get better odds of trying to work out what's going to happen by this time next week.
And Ellen, in terms of, we're nearly at 3 years in this process and we don't seem to have a plan. What could possibly be the plan within the next week?
It's impossible to say, isn't it? It's impossible to say both for the UK as a whole, also for Scotland, and I think if we're honest, the EU is just as astounded and puzzled by what is going on. Within a week, we can't get anything done, but we can mess a great deal of things up, even more than they already are, and that seems to be the trend that we've been encountering over the last 3 years, almost. I really don't know.
And I suppose what makes it even, you know, to add to the mix already, is the fact that we're nearly coming to European elections again.
Yeah. Which seems to be the first time that the UK has seriously talked about European elections ever since I can remember, and I've been here for more than half my life. It's very interesting to see that suddenly this is a topic when it has never been a topic before. Obviously the EU is making allowances to potentially even allow for the UK to continue to participate and to participate in that election, and I'm sure that folks like Alan Smith would love to keep their jobs and continue to lobby for Scotland if they're able to in that forum. But all of the options that we're looking at the minute seem extremely unlikely. That is because they are extremely unlikely options. We find ourselves in an extremely unlikely situation.
And in terms of, for example, yourself and other EU nationals that are here at the moment, how is this whole thing, how is it feeling to you right now?
I don't think, I know for a fact that at least 50% of EU nationals in my surroundings are currently either leaving or are making plans to leave. For us, obviously, Brexit hit much earlier than for everybody else because the discrimination that has been caused by the uncertainty specifically affects employment. Even I am seriously considering leaving within the next couple of weeks. Something that I never thought I'd do.
And it's not just the Brexit issue. I mean, I can tell you from our casework, we wrote to all EU nationals in Glasgow South West, but we now have this ludicrous situation where EU nationals are failing an habitual residency test when they shouldn't be failing that habitual residency test. We've already got casework of women who had left their partners, they've got children. They should be passing the habitual residency test, and we're now having a real issue here with the Department of Work and Pensions who are failing and saying to people, you don't meet the criteria, you will not get state support. Now, this is a ludicrous situation, but it adds up to this culture of fear that EU nationals have, and why EU nationals like Ellen and many others are now considering that they should leave. And to add to that, one of the areas in my constituency, Ardennes, which has a high number of EU nationals, what the local housing association is saying to me is that these EU nationals are now leaving the area and they're now going back to Poland or wherever. So, I think there's a real hostile environment that's getting created towards EU nationals, and it really, really disturbs me and really worries me.
We are here today with Ken McDonald from IceCot magazine and with Dr. Craig Dalzell, Head of Policy of Commonweal.
Hello.
So, we're going to start off with our favourite topic this week. As last week and the week before that, and I reckon it's going to be for the next couple of weeks as well. We just had a not so meaningful vote 2.5 this week, and this is what we're looking forward to for the beginning of this week as well. So, any thoughts on that?
I'm fed up with it. I'm sick, tired to the back teeth of Brexit. It's just getting to the ridiculous stages now, and some adult somewhere has to put their hand up and say, enough kids, let's try and focus on the task ahead and let's try and achieve something. As it is, it's just a playground rant. It seems to be. I don't know what you make of it, Craig.
It's interesting that in her speech after the vote, Theresa May said that she thought that we were approaching the limits of what could be done in the House, but then immediately just said, right, nothing's changing, I'm going to bring it back next week for a fourth go. So we still don't know what's going to happen. There is going to be another round of indicative votes looking at all the various options, but at the last round nothing got a majority. Some of the options did better than others. It's interesting that the option that got the most votes was for a second EU referendum.
Which is an option that we all kind of intermittently forget about because it just doesn't seem...
Yep, although the option that had the narrowest majority was for a UK-wide customs union, which is one of the options that has been entertained at some point. It does breach one of the UK's 3 major red lines, but all of the options breach at least one of the UK's 3 lines. The red lines are mutually exclusive. They were never going to work.
Absolutely, and especially considering that these are red lines set by Theresa May, who appears to be on her way out. It's interesting that we're having
this was
more or less on her way out. At least this is the first time that we've heard her say that she's quite happy to.
We just don't know what's going on. I mean, for people like ourselves that are immersed in politics probably 24/7, 365, just imagine the average Joe and Jane that's trying to follow what's going on. If we can't comprehend what's going to happen within, several hours' time, never mind days or weeks ahead, what do they make of this? And these are people that have votes that will determine whether or not we're actually going to be either in Europe or out Europe. And we argued before that the 17.4 million or 17.5 million were actually fed narrative from the press and some high-profile individuals that this was going to be sunny uplands. And they're suddenly realising, why are we not getting what we asked for? And I don't understand what they're talking about, and why are we so bogged down in procedure? This is absolutely crazy stuff. So it really is, I mean, apart from being interesting times, it's just baffling. I mean, it's just very, very difficult to predict what's going to happen next. You never know.
We have a special feature to share with you today. If you want to tweet to us, you can use the hashtags that are going to show up in the bottom of the screen in a second. Today we're here with the artistic director of the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, that's David Greig. And we have Lisa Peebles, who's a housing rights advocate here in Glasgow. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Hiya. So we've had another interesting week in politics, and we're looking forward to another extremely interesting and tense week in politics. Maybe as a brief summary, I'll go into what happened and summarise it a little bit for you. So we had the indicative votes process, and that cut short. There was meant to be another session of indicative votes, which got a result that was exactly split down the middle. So the Speaker of the House made the decision according to the rules and voted against it. The next thing that happened is that different bills came through the House of Lords, but Theresa May actually had the gall to, in an act of really bad faith, instead of waiting for that to pass through the House of Lords and to get royal assent, she had on Monday night already sent this to a letter to the EU and asked them for an extension until the 30th of June. This is kind of important because there was a bill that Joanna Cherry introduced that would have prevented for all of us a no-deal Brexit. The reason why that didn't happen was because Labour whipped against participating in this vote. And so Labour was actually the reason that this is not off the table and continues not to be off the table, only to the next day support a bill that was very poorly worded. This was the Yvette Cooper bill. And this bill also got passed, but now that Theresa May has gone and requested an extension for Article 50 not to be triggered until the 30th of June, so that we won't leave the EU until then, we're again in a very strange and not particularly democratic area of politics, and not entirely sure where we're going with this. I think, to start off with, you come from a very creative background, but all of us are kind of dragged into this mire of politics. Are you finding yourself able to keep up with it still? I feel like we're missing a day and everything goes out the window.
It's a story that's moving so quickly in some ways, and in other ways it's completely static, it's not changing. I mean, Limmy, when he tweets, has a thing sometimes where he'll tweet after a big event that people get very excited about, whether it's in Trump's world or Brexit, and he'll tweet, nothing's going to change, nothing's going to change. And it's partly a joke, but actually I think he's bang on the money that the big thing underlying this is nothing has changed. So every day there's a different thing, there's an indicative vote, there's something, she sends a letter, nothing has changed. The EU has the power to either decide or not decide whether we're in or out with no deal, and there is no majority, there is no plan, there is no nothing in any part of our democratic system as it currently exists outside of Holyrood, where Nicola Sturgeon has been relatively clear about what she wants. There is no plan, and there is no majority for a plan, and there is no means to getting a plan, because every angle that they go down, whether it's a general election, you can't call a general election with May as Prime Minister because she said she's going to resign, so it would have to be a Tory leadership election, and before you can say Jack Robinson, it's June of whatever and we're out again. there's no majority for a thing in Parliament, so Parliament can't take control. Just every angle you look at, you end up in the same place, and that's why I'm afraid I'm very pessimistic about it. The other thing I would say about being creative about it is I not only could I not write this, could nobody write this, but if anybody did write this, I would say to them, this is just unstageable, it's boring. Well, not boring, it's just repetitive, it doesn't make any sense. You know, go and make it have a point, and then I'll think about making a film of it or whatever. It just feels like a dreadful mire.
And it's extremely complex, I think, especially for younger people who aren't used to the procedures as such, but are interested in the political outcomes more than anything. We're suddenly seeing an array of so-called democratic mechanisms that come from Westminster that I have never heard of in my life, and especially as a foreigner, it seems absurd. Nobody could if you tried to reinvent democracy, you wouldn't do it like that. Nobody could come up with these procedures.
But the thing that I keep coming back to through this entire process, and as you say, it's changing day by day, hour by hour, the phrase that keeps going through my head is democracy's dead. You know, because there was a democratic process where people chose a very, very bad decision. And it's a bit like, I see it as a bit like national self-harm. You know, adults are entitled to have autonomy over their bodies and do whatever they want to them, but sometimes through that autonomy they make bad decisions and hurt themselves, and this to me is the same thing. You know, and people in situations like that, you know, intervene and prevent people making those bad decisions and harming themselves. And when I look at this, the whole democratic process has been exposed as a complete and total failure, because actually democracy leads to very bad decisions sometimes.
I'm Anne McLaughlin, and my guests this week are actor and film director Ian Robertson.
Hello.
And actor turned MP Deirdre Brock. Welcome both of you. Now, I told Ian that I was going to tell him about a little link that there is between the two of them that he doesn't know about. So, both of you did many, many things as actors, but what you might not know, River City actor, is that Deirdre also starred in a drama, long-running drama, stroke soap opera. Deirdre?
Yeah, no, it was not a starring role. Nothing like your position. I was there for 2 days. I was doing a short job as an actor. I was playing a doctor. I had to give someone some bad news, I think. In Home and Away.
Home and Away. God,
which, yeah.
I was actually going to sing both theme tunes for you, but I decided
maybe later.
We can end with that. And you trained as an actor as well, didn't you?
Did, darling.
So what is it about being going to the RSAMD or whatever that it suddenly makes you interested in politics?
I know. I can't think for the life of me.
Well, it does give you an advantage at hustings and things, because, you know, people would come up to me after them and say, you were the only person I could hear. Because you
were trained.
Yeah.
Project your voice, darling.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we are going to be talking today about a number of different things, but the first thing, because for this week, for the first time in a long, long time, there's been a bit of a move on Brexit. Something happened. So the Article 50 extension, the thing that would have seen us falling out of Europe on last Friday with the deal, was extended. And do you want to say a bit about how that happened? And
well, I mean, it was Theresa May was basically instructed that had to happen by the Parliament. Parliament seized control, and so she went back and duly asked for it. And the very sensible people in Europe said, well, okay. I mean, there were attempts by Macron, for example, to try and put limitations on that. But yes, it's been extended to Halloween. So we all sort of saw a metaphor in that. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing's just been toing and froing. And I mean, we'll probably get into Brexit and the two big parties down in Westminster and their attitudes towards it later, but I mean, it really is something to sit there, front row seats, watching this play out, because I mean, the internal tensions between both of those, both of those parties is just extraordinary, and frankly has led us to being in this ridiculous mess that we're in.
Yeah. How does it look from your perspective, Ian? I mean, you're known for being quite political with a small p, but how does it, okay, maybe a medium-sized p.
Cantankerous.
How does it look as it unfolded this week?
For someone who has an interest in a great interest in politics, I am so scunnered. I am so, I think the state of British politics is so embarrassing. I'm even getting to the point where I don't know what's going on. I'm past caring. You know, I don't tend to be one of those kind of, you know, oh, just get on with it, just get on with it kind of types. But I am at this. You know, it was good to see something happen and understand and follow it. But it's so, I mean, it's embarrassing. It's just completely.
I know the damage to Britain's international reputation is just stunning, actually, because, you know, there was always Britain's reputation in terms of trade and just sort of its presence overseas was always, you know, that it was the strong and stable one, that you could rely on them, that they, you know, the British sense of fair play and was something that, you know, they clung to. And now, I mean, that's just completely ripped apart. And frankly, as far as I can see from people in Australia that I know, where I'm from, and just generally across Europe, Britain's a laughing stock as a result of all this, and it will take forever for that to be healed.
I remember seeing Yanis Varoufakis talking on Question Time before the vote, you know, advocating, even though he had and has serious issues with Europe and you know what happened with Greece, but advocating a Remain vote because he didn't want to see the European, you know, experiment collapse. He didn't want to see us leave and that start a domino effect of particularly a rise of the right, etc. I think what Britain has done, though, has probably been the best thing for the unity of the European Union. I think the rest of Europe must be looking at us, complete basket cases, and think, no, maybe we'll just stick with this. You know, and it is the only thing that I take solace in is seeing the Republic of Ireland, who are so used to being you know, for centuries getting run roughshod by the British state, to see them have such power because they've got the backing of the 27 member states.
They did it so beautifully. I mean, their ministers went round to every single one of the countries in Europe twice to check that they had their support. You know, the first time to explain the situation, to explain what it meant having a hard border in Ireland, and the second time to sort of just double check that it was all, you know, yes, they still had the support. And Europe has held absolutely firm on that. And, you know, it just shows you what a small independent nation in Europe can achieve.
And in actual fact, I'm going to come on to that later because you questioned Theresa May about something she'd said about us as a small and potentially independent country in Europe. I'll come on to that. So the result of what happened last week, the EU summit saying yes, okay, you can have till the end of October, is that we are now going to have to put forward candidates across the UK for the European elections. Maybe, well, all the parties are going to have to do it, but maybe we won't be standing, maybe we will. So yet more confusion, but everybody's geared up for it.
I know. I mean, it beggars belief, really, the amount of work that this has cost, the amount of money it has cost. I mean, just the news about the civil servants that have all been stood down from possible no-deal Brexit preparations and the amount of money, £1.5 billion, I think, has been spent on that. And there's a whole lot of civil servants that have been recruited, extra recruits as well. What's going to happen to them? I mean, the impact it's had on departmental activities already. I mean, my understanding, we've had a lot of issues around the Home Office. And, I mean, I've got caseloads as long as your arm, just that we've had problems with the Home Office, and my understanding is that that's partly caused by the fact that a number of their best people have been shifted over to the Department for Exiting the EU. So, so you know, the wider ripples of just the sort of straight day-to-day thing of preparing for no deal is felt throughout Whitehall, and then the impact that has on just my constituents, you know, the folk who are just trying to...
But then I feel so sorry for my English friends who don't have a devolved government. I mean, there is that, you know, our devolved government is getting on with the day job. is still doing all the things that a government should be doing and working through their manifestos and their policies, whereas my friends in England don't have. You know, I'm very lucky. My MSP is the First Minister of Scotland, so you know, but they don't have MSPs who are working on their behalf. While this Parliament is so obsessed with Brexit and letting everything go by the by.